Hello, everybody. I'm a practicing therapist and a doctoral student of psychology. Today, I wanted to go over why avoidants get distant after a fight. Now, fights, argument, disagreement, something of that sort, a negative conflict. And why this actually happens is a lot of individuals who have avoidant attachment, particularly dismissive avoidance, but sometimes fearful avoidance as well, this can apply. Any sort of emotionally charged situation, whether it be positive or negative, they don't really understand how to, it's not that they don't understand, they need time to process. And usually the way they process is they take time for themselves. And that can be perceived as distant, which it is distant, but often this will decrease as the relationship progresses if they're leaning more towards becoming secure. And if they're continuously triggered through the relationship, it actually increases as the relationship progresses. And so those are two different pathways of how this plays out. And the first reason why avoidants get distant after an argument is actually what we just touched on. They process emotions. Avoidants struggle with extreme emotions and often need alone time, basically, to figure out their feelings. Unlike secure and anxious individuals, they don't process emotions as quickly. And so this often leads to distancing themselves during and after a conflict. Now, if it's happening during a conflict, usually this means that individual really is feeling incredibly overwhelmed, whether it's you doing it, whether it's them doing it, whether it's an outside stressor, or all of the above. It's important to not take it personally. However, it can be beneficial to reflect as to why this is occurring, because if it is occurring because you are doing something that's a little bit overwhelming to them, I know you don't mean to, it can help to reduce whatever that is so that they're less distant during and after the argument. And so you guys can have a conversation about that actually at one point whenever things calm down a little bit. Mention, I noticed that you seemed a little overwhelmed. I could be wrong. Clarify if that's not true. But is there something I said? Is there something I did? I can take it. Just let me know so that we can get out of this pattern. Whatever it may be, avoidants will really appreciate that because they feel heard. And you might actually appreciate hearing the reality so that this stops happening. I think a lot of times with individuals who have insecure attachment, the reason why things can be so frustrating is because two individuals are operating very differently with all relationships. But sometimes you guys are operating oppositely, which can be really frustrating. And so you guys need a guide on how to figure things out. Obviously, that's why I make videos, so I can help folks. But the best guide is not me, it's going to be each other. And so ask each other what's really going on so that this can stop happening. Or why do they need to process emotions to such an extent? Is there something significant that's bothering them that maybe you caused or they caused or whatever, just so you can fix it? The next one is the view of relationships. Avoidants tend to have very limited experience with long-term relationships, and they may perceive fighting as a negative sign. And they feel like it's a sign you shouldn't be together, even though that's not necessarily true, but they take it like that because they don't know. And there's another perspective of this. There's two different versions, okay? Some avoidants grew up in a family where emotions were not expressed, and so their parents just didn't fight, and they just didn't ever resolve anything. That's one version, right? And that's a little bit more common with dismissive avoidance. Fearful avoidance, sometimes they grew up where the relationship, their parents fought all the time and they don't want that ever. And so they're really scared of that. And then there's another branch of fearful avoidance where they think that that's normal. So that could be something as well. Some fearful avoidants actually are used to fighting. And so those ones don't typically get distant after a fight. So that's not really beneficial. But fearful avoidant and dismissive avoidant, a lot of them view relationships and fighting as a bad thing. And so they're uncomfortable with that. But that doesn't mean that you guys are fighting too often. It just means that they're sensitive to the frequency of fighting in general. And so have a conversation about it or get on the same page, because maybe it just means that you guys need to have a different way to help them build tolerance, and you communicate your needs in a way that's palatable to both folks. And it'll take some time. Relationships are difficult. The next one is fear of loss. Avoidance actually, of course, as anybody who's in love with somebody, they're afraid to lose that person. And avoidants actually specifically feel like this during conflict. And I'm going to explain this a little bit more as to why this happens. Let's start with fearful avoidance. Fearful avoidance did see they have seen a lot of trauma. And sometimes they have experiences where their parents or caregivers or whoever would really hurt them a lot during conflict and even abandon them. So let's say they have let's say a fearful avoidant, he had a very manipulative mother, and times where she didn't listen to him, she would make a big deal out of it, complain, when he didn't listen to her, she would make a big deal out of it, make some sort of conflict, and then she would abandon him. And the reason why I'm saying abandon in a quotation is because sometimes people think that's not abandonment because she didn't physically leave, but she might have emotionally withdrawn, right? And that's still abandonment. It actually is abandonment. He felt that way. She might have actually left the house. Who knows what was going on? And so in his mind, he's thinking, okay, this conflict is terrifying, and I don't want to feel that I'm in this conflict. So they might get very distant or afraid of it. So they might reject the conflict entirely, try to avoid it. And so fearful avoidance might do that. Dismissive avoidance, sometimes what they believe is they don't know what to do with conflict. And so they may avoid it or get distant. Or sometimes with dismissive avoidance, and fearful might have this as well, they may have had a past partner who would do, any sort of ultimatums during the relationship, which is why that fear of loss has increased as time went on. And so they are afraid to lose you because they feel like you can really hurt them during this moment. And so both types of individuals who experience this, because some fearful avoidants are not like this, even some dismissive avoidance, it depends. What they do is they preemptively, they withdraw prior, believing that space will minimize the risk of that ultimatum or potential breakup. The next one is control issues, more common with dismissive avoidance during arguments. Avoidants may feel vulnerable. They do feel vulnerable. And they fear that the feelings that they feel could be used against them. And so what they do is they detach to maintain a sense of control over their emotions and their interactions, simply because they feel if they show their actual feelings, they will be humiliated, they'll be hurt, they'll be judged, they'll be taken advantage of. And so that's something that does happen, and that's why sometimes they want to maintain that control. The next one is they struggle to communicate their needs. Sometimes avoidants are just struggling to tell you what's bothering them. And for that reason, they may try to get distant as a protective measure to process their needs, but also sometimes they feel like the negative emotions are overwhelming them so much that they feel like the only need they can meet themselves is their need of control and independence. And so they're almost trying to meet their own needs because they feel like you're not going to meet them for them. They judged you. And so they're trying to meet their own needs. They don't know how to tell you what they want. And so they're shutting down because that's the mechanism that they remember worked for them as a child to somehow get their needs met to some extent, right? And that's what's happening. And so let's go ahead and summarize why avoidants get distant after a fight or even during. The first one is processing emotions, right? Sometimes with avoidance, extreme emotions can be stressful and they need time to process it. The next one is their view of relationships. A lot of them feel that disagreements should not be part of a relationship, whether that be wrong or right. It depends. But a lot of them have very extreme version of what relationships should look like. The next one is fear of loss. They feel that maybe you'll break up with them or some sort of ultimatum, and they're afraid of that. The next one is control issues. Avoidants feel lack of control in these situations, and so they are actually trying to regain control by detaching. And the last one is they struggle to communicate their needs with you, with anyone, and so sometimes they're trying to meet their own needs or shut down to process what's happening. I hope this video is helpful to somebody. Please like, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.